If you're a business owner, no one is more familiar with the curse of a 24-hour day than you. Menial tasks can eat away at your day, taking you away from those projects that fund and grow your company. Unfortunately, hiring is a major pain in the ass. Once you navigate all the tax hurdles and benefits packages, you've spent tens of thousands of dollars and numerous hours without any production and no guarantee that your investment will pay off. This is why Busy Bee's Virtual Services is Stranger Encounters' first sponsor. Bee takes a professional approach, full of passion and zeal for optimizing your time. She attacks every project with the vigor and endurance of a business owner because she understands how important your time and focus is. If you're constantly worried about emails, client relationships, and scheduling your next meeting at the expense of more profitable and meaningful tasks, Bee is ready to assist you in achieving maximum results. For a free consultation, call 337-287-8802 or click on the affiliate link on the front page of StrangerEncountersPodcast.com. Whether you're filling a full-time or part-time position, Bee offers affordable virtual services to minimize your risk and free up your day. Call 337-287-8802 or click on the affiliate link on the front page of StrangerEncountersPodcast.com. Welcome to Stranger Encounters. I am Tommy Salmons. My guest today is Jason Korbel. Jason's a friend of mine, and he is a student of history and the Constitution. And I asked Jason to come on the podcast to talk about red flag laws. Not everybody's going to be familiar with red flag laws. Not everybody's going to agree with everything we have to say. I just ask that you hear Jason out. He makes really good arguments. He is a store of knowledge, and I always enjoy talking to him. So here it is. Well, I'm here with Jason Korbel. What's going on, Jason?
Hey, not too much, Tommy. It's nice to be back on.
Yeah, it's good to have you back on. It's good to hear from you. Glad everything's going well. I wanted to talk to you about red flag laws, and I was looking it up the other day, and seems that 14 states have passed red flag laws, and you happen to live in Florida, which is one of the states that have red flag laws on the books. And
Yep.
For those of y'all who don't know what I'm talking about when I say red flag laws, basically the law is set up, and Jason, you correct me if I mix this up any, but basically the law is set up that if somebody reports you as having a mental illness, or they don't feel like you're mentally capable of handling yourself or with a firearm, that they can go and file a type of protection order against you with the state, and the state will come in, they will send police to your house, they will come in and they will forcibly take your guns away from you, and then they will allow you to come contest that. Was it 14 or 30 days later, something like that? Is that about right?
Yeah, that's. I don't have all the details in a row on exactly how these laws work, especially in all the different 14 states. But that sounds to be about the right of it. Yeah, they'll come. It's usually like, it doesn't even have to be somebody that knows you. That's the scary part. It doesn't have to be like, the idea was because of after this shooting that took place in Parkland. Everybody panicked. Oh, this guy there's all these red flags. That's why they call them red flag laws, because this guy, was a bona fide nut who, people are saying, well, they should have known that he was going to do something like this. If we had these laws on the books where we can just say, oh, this guy might be dangerous, well, we're going to go take the gun so that this kind of thing doesn't happen. That's the justification they use to pass these laws. And like I said, I don't know all the details of exactly how it works, how the filing works, but I know you don't even have to be related to the person. It could just be like somebody has a grudge against you make some crap up, say, oh, I've heard this guy talking about he was going to go shoot up a school, and it might just be somebody, was pissed off because you looked at him wrong or something, and then the police are going to come and they're going to take your guns away, and then you've got to go to court to try to get them back.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of people being guilty until proven innocent. And I've been saying for a while that that due process is dead. Like this is really a thing of the past anymore. We don't have full due process. People, even in the public opinion, which is the public citizens are the ones who are going to be on your jury when you do go to a trial. You're convicted in a court of public opinion, whether it's through smears in the news and articles or on cable news or whatever. And you don't have that anonymity going into these cases, in at least the bigger profile cases, Yeah,
no, you're exactly right. It's very scary. The good news is that these laws are relatively new, which means that they have not been litigated yet. They have not gone to court yet. So I don't know exactly how the courts are going to rule. I'm sure that I haven't heard any stories of legal challenges that are forthcoming, but I have to believe that those are in the works. And I don't know exactly how this is going to go. I imagine it's going to go different in different states. I know in Florida here, we are a very divided state. We have a lot of people on both sides. It's always a toss-up to know which way an election's going to go. I like to believe that we're going to, not put up with this nonsense for long, but I can't say that for sure either, because we have a transient population down here, and it's hard to know who's coming, who's going, and what their lives are. So I'm not sure how that's going to go, but at the very least, I can say these laws have not yet been challenged in court, and so at least we have the slight hope that when they are finally challenged in court, that this is going to go away.
Well, and as I was talking to you about earlier, Marco Rubio has advocated for, or he's brought forward a bill doing this exact thing at the federal level, and this fits right in with what Donald Trump was telling Dianne Feinstein a while back, that he wants to take the guns first and give due process second. And
right, yep, I remember him saying that, and I remember him saying that, and I remember thinking that's an outrageous thing. I couldn't believe that. It's sad because when you see that kind of thing, the cult of Trump is such that because normally, if a Democrat said something like that, all these Trumpers out there, they'd be livid. Oh, they want to take the guns. Now their dear leader says it, and you can hear a cricket.
Right,
just crickets.
Well, and the fact of the matter is that under a Republican regime, if a Republican wants to go through and pass gun control legislation, they have the backing of all the well, not all of, but a lot of the Second Amendment crowd, a lot of the NRA members are fall into the Republican Party line, and they will defend, just like the NRA defends, gun control bills that go completely against everything they want. And so when Obama was in office, they wanted to cry and scream the entire time, he's going to take our guns, he's going to take our guns, he's going to take our guns. Gun sales went through the roof. There was very little legislation, if any, that was even mentioned, if passed. And now that Trump is in office, this will be the first big legislation that we're looking at on gun control, but it goes right along with bump stocks. You're outlawing a piece of plastic. You're putting people in prison for 5 to 10 years for owning a piece of plastic. And that just seems completely absurd to me.
Well, the whole time you were talking, that's what I was thinking about was bump stocks, was the fact that you were talking about during the Obama administration, all these, supposed conservatives and, gun rights people were crying and moaning and saying, oh, he's going to take our guns. Donald Trump, through his bump stock, legislation, or I think it was an executive order actually, which makes it even more, illegitimate. But, the fact of the matter is that, he's already enacted more gun control than Obama ever did.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
That one.
That's what I was thinking. I didn't think Obama actually did anything. He did a lot. He did a lot of posturing. He talked a lot, but I didn't think he ever passed any bills or signed any legislation in the gun control world. Honestly,
no,
Obama didn't do much of
there was
anything.
There was talk during the Obama administration of putting different restrictions on ammunition was the way that they were going to go at it, but nothing ever came of it. He was never actually able to get anything passed or never put anything into action. So yeah, he didn't really do anything on the gun control, as much as everybody wanted to say that, Barack Obama wants to take your guns. And I have no doubt that he did want to take people's guns. He just never actually did anything to that effect.
Yeah, and I think that the powers that be have realized that I don't know when they realized it. They may have realized it. They may have been playing this game the entire time and setting up this whole process. But I think they've realized that if you want to shut up the anti-war crowd, have a Democrat constantly going to war. And if you want to shut up the Second Amendment crowd, have a Republican passing gun control laws. I think they figured that out a while back, and it works. I mean, it completely works.
Yeah.
You hear very little anti-war talk coming from the left. You have some really hardcore progressives that fall into the Tulsi Gabbard category, or that are still anti-war. But for the most part, there's no Democrats, like especially mainstream Democrats, that are going to be anti-war anymore. Ever since Obama started 22 different conflicts.
Honestly, I don't even know what counts as a mainstream Democrat anymore, because, I mean, I would say Tulsi Gabbard is not, but then you also have your Joe Bidens, who, your old school Democrats, but then you have your, open socialists like, this dingbat up in New York, Cortez or Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah.
And it's is that the new Democrat? Is that the new mainstream Democrat? I don't even know anymore. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've done some shows on talking about Cortez. I don't have a whole lot to say about her, other than she is dangerous, to the idea of freedom. But, I could be proven wrong at some point in time in the future, and I'm not beyond admitting that. The funniest thing is when there was that meme going around, I don't know if you saw it, but it was a picture of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, with her big old bug eyes, like she's like shocked out of her gourd. And, it had that Donald Trump quote that I say we take the guns first and due process second. And all the Trump supporters were going nuts, like, look at this fucking moron, blah, 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 right? And then when you pointed out that it was actually a Donald Trump quote on a picture of her, they were like, well, he probably had good reason, and, yada, yada. It's like, yeah. Well,
wow.
That's.
Yeah, I haven't seen that meme, but wow.
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me.
I had posted it a while back. It was pretty funny. I thought it was hilarious. I actually texted Mance, Pete Raymond. I had actually texted him when I saw it come out. I was like, dude, did you make that? And he's like, no, I wish. I was like, oh, okay, because that looked like some of your handiwork, but I wasn't sure. So because he was the one who posted it that I'd seen. That's who I'd shared it from. So I thought maybe he had made it, but it wasn't him. He's not taking credit for it. So I don't know where it came from, but that was like classic meme. That was one of the best ones I've seen all year. But okay, so let's get back onto the red flag laws. I can digress in all kinds of different directions and talk all kinds of shit all night long, but let's get back on the red flag laws. When I had heard the other day, and I don't know how familiar you are with the statistics, but in I think in Maryland or Massachusetts passed the law like last October, and by November they had already confiscated like over 164 firearms. I don't know if that's from separate individuals or just 3 or 4 guys. I don't know. So I'm not gonna claim I know how many households that was, but I know it was 160 some odd firearms. But there was a really controversial situation in which you might suspect people got shot. And what had happened, the police showed up at, as they like to do, pre-dawn to take people off guard and surprise somebody. And the guy, he didn't like being woke up from a dead sleep to banging on his front door. And so he got his gun and he went to the front door and he saw his police and he set his gun down on the floor and he stepped outside to talk to the police, and they told him why they were there, to serve this warrant and take his firearms, and he went for his gun. One of the police officers tried to grab his wrist. They wrestled. Shot was fired. Nobody was hit, and the police opened fire on the guy and killed him dead there on the spot.
Wow.
This is like what people automatically, like any Second Amendment advocate, any gun advocate will tell you immediately, this is what's going to start happening. People are going to get killed for no reason. Like, we don't know we don't know who this guy was or if he was guilty of anything, if he had ever committed a crime. We don't know anything about this guy. All we know, from my point of view, is that somebody called the police, had a protection warrant served on him to take his firearms. With no due process and no evidence of wrongdoing.
No, I'm not surprised at all. I am absolutely certain that there's going to be more violence if they continue down this road, if they continue, if they continue trying to confiscate weapons. I mean, like we talked about before, it makes me a little nervous because of the fact that, we know that some of the Republicans who are more partisan Republicans might back it if it's the Republican administration doing it. And I mean, I'm not going to speak for all Democrats. I'm not a Democrat, and I don't know. I'm not a Republican either, but I don't really have a lot of friends that are Democrats. I have a few, but not a whole lot. And I don't know how many of them have guns, if they're gonna support, this going down this road. But I know it's a very dangerous road to go down. People are going to get killed. There's going to be police officers that get killed because, I'll be honest with you, the first thing that I thought of when you were telling me the story is that the guy should not have stepped outside.
Yeah.
And that's just a tactical. That was just the first thing that came to my head is, well, he shouldn't have stepped outside. As soon as he saw who it was, he should have had his gun in his hand and told, so what do you want? Why are you here? I mean, I don't know if that would have gone any differently. They might have killed him anyway. Either way, he ended up dead. And then that's a horrible, horrible story. And, honestly, yeah, it's going to continue to go down that road. There's going to be cops that get shot, trying to enforce it. To be honest with you, I don't really feel sorry for them. I know maybe that I'm sure they're going to have some conservative people that are wringing their hands at the sky when I say that, how dare he's saying it's okay for people to shoot cops. Well, you know what? I mean, that's how the Revolutionary War started, was the people in Boston had engaged in some anti-tax protesting, some anti-British protesting, and they said this place is a powder keg. We need to take away their guns, and that's what the battles of Lexington and Concord were. Was that the armory, the colonial armory, was at Concord, and the British were marching from Boston to Concord to go take the guns. And then what happened? Well, they showed up and they said, "You're not going to take our guns," and that was the beginning of the fighting right there. So I don't know that it's going to go down that road. I don't know that there's enough people that would be willing to resist, but I can tell you that it's going to continue to spiral out of control, and these laws are very, very dangerous.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't know. I haven't heard of any shootings in regards to this in Florida, but I know that I think it was as of November of last year, authorities in Florida had already confiscated over 970 firearms from people. So it would be hard for me to believe that they were able to confiscate that many firearms without some sort of conflict, but I don't remember hearing of anything or reading of anything. Do you know of anything that was happening?
I haven't. Yeah, I haven't really read anything. Not at least not in my area of Florida. Florida is a pretty big state. We got 29 million people here now. So I haven't heard anything as far as the statistics for that goes. I don't know how many people are going to resist. I think that unfortunately it will probably be too small of a number. And at the risk of sounding radical, this is so blatantly unconstitutional, and I'm not just talking about this is against the Constitution of the state of Florida. This is against when it's done at the state level, it's against the Constitution of the state of Florida. When it's done at the federal level, if Marco Rubio gets his way and gets this bill passed, that's also unconstitutional at the federal level. But honestly, I don't know how many of the people are going to resist that, especially because of the fact that what they're doing is they're doing it piecemeal. They're doing it one at a time. They're not, I think our culture has a problem with guns because they don't understand what an armed society was supposed to be. I think that the Second Amendment and the purpose of the Second Amendment is widely misunderstood. And I think that our culture has become such that there is a lot of people that will actually support this, and that actually scares me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And not even, and then there are those that'll just go along to get along. They're just lifeless. They're just kind of like la da da and just go along to get along. And seems like a decent compromise to me. And okay, that's fine. So you brought up Constitution there, and this is going to get into some of the meat and potatoes. And this is why I really had you on, because this is the type of stuff I can talk to you about, and you're not afraid to just shoot straight about it. So the 14 states that have passed this law, and I know I think there's 25 other states with a bill, some proposed legislation, still on the books. So I mean, there could be a lot more states coming, but the 14 states that did pass the law, there are going to be a lot of people out there saying, well, they can't do that. That is unconstitutional. We have a Second Amendment. Can you explain to these people why it is that states can do this, number one, and why they have been taught that states aren't allowed to act outside of the United States Constitution?
Well, I mean, okay, so those are two different situations there. in regard to the first one, the question is whether or not a state can do this is actually not an open question. Like I said, in Florida here, the state actually can't do this, and that's not because of the United States Constitution. That's because of the fact that it's against the Florida Constitution. So what we're getting into here is we're getting into the incorporation doctrine, and the incorporation doctrine is one of these things that's tricky because of the fact that for those of your listeners who don't know, basically what the incorporation doctrine says is that when the Bill of Rights was first passed, it was a list of restrictions on the federal government. It did not apply to the states. Now, my argument is that that is still correct, that the Bill of Rights is a list of restrictions on the federal government and not the states. But the incorporation doctrine suggests that through the mechanism of the 14th Amendment, that somehow this magically made the Bill of Rights apply to the states. The problem legally here, this is where we're getting into some partisanship, is that neither side likes this incorporation doctrine in all situations. They kind of go with it like selectively. Like you'll have conservatives who don't like the incorporation doctrine when it has to do with, say, the First Amendment. Okay, like if a state passes a law that somehow curtails somebody's free speech or something like that, they'll scream and cry and say no, you can't. Well, I'm kind of losing my thought here because I was that was actually more of a thing that like the left might propose.
Right.
But in any case, the point is each side seems to like the incorporation doctrine for certain things and dislike it for certain things. But it's a false legal theory. There's a lot of books available out there to talk about this in a more in-depth way. One of the better ones out there is my friend Dave Benner has a book out there on the incorporation doctrine. I think it's called The 14th Amendment and the Incorporation Doctrine. Mm-hmm. Pretty self-explanatory. Mm-hmm. There's also another one, an older one, written by a guy named Raoul Berger, called Government by Judiciary, where he gets into the 14th Amendment, why it does not incorporate the Bill of Rights against the states. So that's your basic incorporation doctrine theory. That's where we're getting at. The people that are saying, "Oh, state can't do this." They're arguing in favor of incorporation. These same people are going to argue against incorporation in certain cases. And so they kind of pick and choose. So to answer the first question, a state can do this based on whether or not it's within their own constitution, because each state has its own constitution. We don't just have the federal constitution. Each individual state has their own. So like I said, in Florida here, the right to keep and bear arms is a protected constitutional right according to the Constitution of the state of Florida. Mm-hmm. I can't speak to every other state. I don't know what their constitutions say. So I'm pretty sure that California does not, for instance, have that in their constitution. So therefore, because California's constitution does not prohibit their government from doing this, they absolutely can. They could ban guns outright if they wanted to. And people will cry, "Oh, you can't do this because of the Second Amendment." Well, the Second Amendment is a restriction on the federal government because, and this is where we're going to have to, if you want to get into the weeds on this is where we're going to have to get into the weeds about why the Second Amendment was written, what it was for, what its original intention was. But basically, the states can do it because of the fact that the Bill of Rights does not apply to the states. It actually only applies to the federal government.
Right. Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people understand that, and I think that's kind of been bred out of the thought of the American people through the public school systems. We're taught, one nation under God. We're taught large centralized, government. We're taught all these things, and so we look at the United States as an is and not as an are. Basically as
right.
one single entity. Go ahead.
Well, no, you're exactly right. I forgot that was the second part that you had asked me about. That's exactly right. What was happening here? The other thing that they'll go on, if they don't go by on the 14th Amendment, they'll try to say the Supremacy Clause. Mm-hmm. Which basically the Supremacy Clause basically states that if a federal law is in conflict with a state law, that the federal law is superior. But there's a caveat to this that everybody leaves out. See, they're taught that in school. They're taught the Supremacy Clause, and it's just left at, well, if you have a conflict between a state law and a federal law, the federal law trumps the state law. But the Supremacy Clause specifically states that is only true if it is a law or a power over which the federal government is explicitly granted authority, which would be listed under their enumerated powers in, Article 1, Section 8. There's only 17 specific powers listed there, too, so.
Right. Oh, my dog's back. I don't know if you could hear that. He just broke in. Or he's trying to. All right, he made me lose my train of thought there for a second. Let me get back on track. I'm like, what's going on? You're completely right. And people want to incorporate the entire the entire country. And what's the, my whole thing is kind of like this. It's like, what would be the point of individual states having their own individual constitutions if they were already covered under the large scale umbrella of the U.S. Constitution? So people, some of these things you can just break down to a simple logic and theory explanation. And, and then I can call people like you that can get into the weeds and really break it down for us into very nuanced and complex arguments as well.
Well, the problem is that the vast majority of the American people, as you alluded to when you talked about the one nation under God, that, we all said, I remember when I was a kid, being forced to stand up and put my hand over my heart and repeat, recite this pledge like a good little slave. And I didn't really think much of it, but for most people, that's going to put a lot of thought in their head, and that's really going to sink in, and that's what they think, that's what they've been taught to believe. And so I think that they have a fundamental misunderstanding of what the United States are. They view it as a singular country. You'll hear about people you'll hear it on the conservative side, you'll hear it on the liberal side. It doesn't really matter who, it seems to be almost a universally accepted truth now that we are this one people, this one people idea. But that's not really what it is. Now, you look at the Constitution, the federal government was granted 17 specific powers. But what's funny about that is that if we went through and was looking at those 17 powers, you can actually put them into only two categories. One of two categories. And that would be either interactions between the states themselves or interactions between the states and foreign governments, foreign states.
Right.
And the idea of the Constitution was to bring separate, sovereign, independent states together and, basically create a free trade zone among them and also to be united for the purposes of dealing with foreign, whether it was a foreign threat, militarily, or whether it was, trade, or just basically diplomacy. That they didn't want New York to be trading with a country that, say, South Carolina was at war with. They don't want to have South Carolina at war, but New York trading. They wanted to make sure that if we're going to have an enemy, that it's going to be the enemy of us all. We're supposed to be united in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I'm bringing up the military is because the military and the idea of the military and how the military was supposed to be used is actually the main reason that the Second Amendment was written. And I think that's really where we got to get into on this topic, because conservatives, see, when I discuss this with people on the left, they love to point out the militia clause. They say, "Oh, well, this is only for this amendment only applied to the militia,"
Mm-hmm.
and then they somehow think that the National Guard qualifies as a militia. It doesn't. In my opinion, the National Guard is actually an unconstitutional organization in and of itself. But that's kind of a side issue. But so they like to point out the militia clause, and the people on the right, they like to say, no, this was always an individual right. The militia was just an explanation, just an explanatory clause, and it doesn't really mean anything. The problem is they're both wrong. They're both wrong on that, because the militia clause is very important, and it was an individual right, and that's why we have to understand what's going on with the Second Amendment. See, because what we have today, as far as the military is concerned, the military power, would be completely foreign and actually terrifying to the founding generation. Because we have the largest standing military on the planet by far. And I don't mean largest by number, because I'm sure that maybe China has more men or something like that, but we spend more money on weapons and weaponry and the destructive capability. I think the last time I looked at the statistics, it's something like we spend more than 19 of the closest countries below us all combined.
Right.
So I mean, the amount of money we spend dwarfs what anybody else is spending, and we maintain this large-standing military. And this is a foreign concept to the founders, see, because I think that culturally we're so far away from the founders' experience of kings and what standing armies were used for back then, that it's kind of a foreign concept to most Americans now, because while there was police officers, like there'd be a justice of the peace, and there was a sheriff, oftentimes for different counties, the vast majority of law enforcement duties actually, usually in European polities, fell upon the military, where you would have large standing armies that would be used in peacetime to enforce the edicts of the king. And the founding fathers did not want this. They did not want a large standing military that would be used in that way. But at the same time, they wanted to make sure that their new states, that their new independence was able to defend themselves. And so the idea that they came up with was the militia idea. And the idea was that each individual state would have its own militia. And this was to be a regularly organized militia. And this is where the well-regulated part comes. Because if you read the Second Amendment, it states, now I don't have it right in front of me because I'm mobile tonight. So I'm driving right now. so I can't really look at my phone so I'm going off of memory here. But I believe that the Second Amendment, the exact wording is something like a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I believe that's the exact wording.
You're pretty close. I'm looking it up right now.
But the importance of that argument is this term well-regulated. See, people will look at that well-regulated and say, "Oh, look, see, that gives us the right to regulate firearms because it says it's supposed to be well-regulated and it's also only supposed to be in the militia." Well, the term well-regulated back then meant trained. It meant that they were supposed to be able to go out and they were supposed to understand military formations. Because remember, this was written at a time when you went to war, armies would line up in lines and stand on a field and shoot at each other. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so there was formations and marching and they still do drill in the military. They teach people how to march and march in these formations and move in these formations and everything. I'm not really sure why they still do that because those are, those battlefield tactics are not used anymore. Mm-hmm. I think it might just be a discipline, discipline thing or a tradition thing maybe. Mm-hmm. But, at the time, that was military tactics. Those movements, those drillings. That was what they would do on the battlefield. That was how they would deploy. And so, well regulated meant that the people that were part of the militia knew these movements. If they had to go out to fight in a war, they would understand how to march, how to break from a column of four to a line of battle and back again. And they would understand what these movements meant. And that's what the well-regulated militia are. Now, the thing is, so this was the vision that each state would have its own militia, and it would be well-regulated, meaning that it would be well-trained. It would be able to be used in a battle should it be required. Now, under Article 1, Section 8, the federal government is given authority to arm the militia. Mm-hmm. They are so technically speaking, the federal government could pass a law that says everybody, because the next thing I'm going to get into is who is the militia, who constitutes the militia.
Right.
But because the federal government could have the authority to arm the militia, they could pass a law that mandates you must go out and buy a rifle. They mm-hmm. could pass that. That would actually be a constitutional law. If they pass a law that said every citizen of the United States over the age of 18, or say between 18 and say 40, they could say you will have a workable M16 with 1,000 rounds, and right. they could mandate that law. That mm-hmm. would actually be constitutional.
Right.
But the states want to make sure that they were in charge of their militia, and so they also put in the Constitution that these militia units would be always run by the executive or legislative branch of the respective state that it was from, mm-hmm. and that the officers of those units would always be appointed by the states. And so the Second Amendment came out because of the fact that they were afraid, the Founding Fathers were afraid, well, if the federal government has the authority to arm the militia, then they were afraid that might imply that they would also have the power to disarm the militia. And so they wrote the Second Amendment to make sure that the federal government could not pass a law stating that the militia had to be disarmed of a certain state. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, so now let's get into where the individual right comes in.
Okay.
And that is that time of the founders, the militia was considered every able-bodied male between the ages of 17 and 45.
Mm-hmm.
If you, I mean, obviously we had slavery back then, so it was racial. But if you were a free white male between the ages of 17 and 45, you were in the militia.
Mm.
That's what the militia was.
Right.
So because of that definition of the militia, most states, when they passed their militia laws, because in order to have the vision of the founders, this militia system in lieu of a standing army, you would have to have everybody trained. You would have to have everybody, they would have to drill. So each state would have to pass its own organizing law where it would organize its militia. And the federal government was given the authority to specify or to mandate a certain amount of training. Like they could say, well, this is what every state is going to train their militia to do. But the states wanted to, the states had control of the militia, they had control of the officers, and they had control of who was part of that militia. And so therefore, most of the states, I can't say every single one of them because I have not looked at every single state militia act that was created as a result of this, but I can tell you that the vast majority of them mandated not only that every male, every free white male between the ages of 17 and 45 was to be part of the militia, they also mandated that the militia arm itself, each individual person, was to maintain a rifle and, the proper amount of, or a rifle or a musket at the time, and the proper amount of ammunition. So there was laws in every state that you actually had to have a gun. And so that being the case, this was always an individual right because the militia was always made up of all free persons who were members of that society. And so therefore, so the federal government was given this idea, well, we cannot disarm the militia. And since the militia consisted of all citizens, therefore they cannot pass any laws that restrict the firearms of individual citizens. Mm-hmm. So that's that's the whole purpose of the Second Amendment right there. And this is also where we get why can a state pass these red flag laws? Well, like I said, that depends on their individual state constitution because some states put this in there as an individual right. Others did not. And the whole idea that this was left completely to the states because it always had to do with the militia power.
Right. Yeah, and just to kind of cover, I think you nailed the wording on the Second Amendment, but just to make sure that we get it completely right, it says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So it's pretty cut and dry. It's pretty simple. I've heard people debate, oh, well, they put commas here because of this and this, that, and the other. They put a comma here when they should have used a semicolon or whatever. That's fine. That's another. Well, that's much more into the weeds and more grammar than anything.
Those are dangerous arguments, to be honest with you, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to change the grammar because they're trying to get you to not pay attention to the context in which the amendment was passed.
That's
because of the fact that they want to make you think, oh, this means something else. Mm-hmm. You'll hear liberals make the argument that I mentioned this when I was talking before. You'll hear liberals, not so much on the conservative side will you hear this, but you'll hear liberals who will say that, well, the Second Amendment doesn't mean anything anymore because this was to arm the militia, and the state militias are now the National Guard. They did away with the militias, and now they have the National Guard.
Right.
And they're right that there are, to my knowledge, no states that have actual organized militias anymore, which is a shame in my, because I actually think that would be a wonderful system. I actually very much am a fan of the militia system, but
Yeah.
That does not exist anymore. But that being said, the entire context of the Second Amendment was that because the federal government had the right to arm the militia, the states wanted to make sure that they did not have the ability to disarm the militia because the states were afraid of a tyrannical federal government.
Right.
Remember, the principal people of the principles of the Constitution, the principal parties to the compact of the Constitution were not the people in some amalgamated form. That this one people argument that Daniel Webster and Abraham Lincoln made was nonsense. The fact of the matter is, the parties to the Constitution are the states, and the individual states wanted to make sure that they had control over their militia.
Right. And that's why you still have the same type of system for calling a convention of the states. And that's where I wanted to kind of move next, is because with 14 states already passing this law, if it's struck down on the federal level, and if I'm not mistaken, it's 29 states, I believe it takes to call a convention. So if they get 15 more states passing this law, they could call a convention of the states and make this and put this as an amendment. Vote this in as an amendment to the Constitution, and completely destroy the rights to keep and bear arms beyond what they already have. I mean, they're already working around the law or around the amendment on many levels.
It seems to me that they're just straight up ignoring it, because the fact of the matter is, from a federal level, with the Second Amendment, there is no such thing as a constitutional federal firearm regulation. The only firearms regulation that would be constitutional from a federal perspective would be something akin to the idea that every citizen of the United States must have a specific type of weapon.
Mm-hmm.
But they cannot restrict it. The Second Amendment makes it clear you cannot restrict. They cannot restrict individual firearms in any manner. So to that end, they've been violating the law. I believe the first federal firearms regulation act, I believe it was 1934, something like that. So they've been violating the Second Amendment since 1934. They've passed a couple different ones. I think there was one in the 70s. But basically every single federal law restricting firearms in any way is unconstitutional. That hasn't stopped them from doing it, however. And, unfortunately, as much as I love the Constitution, and we've talked about the Constitution many times, I love the vision of the Constitution. I love what the intent of the Constitution was. Unfortunately, I think that the evidence has shown that the government will simply the Constitution means whatever those in power say it means, unfortunately. So, I can sit here and I'm blue in the face about what the founders meant to be, and I try to do that in the hopes that, if enough people get out there and they agree with the views of the founders, that they'll hold the politicians' feet to the fire. I honestly don't have a whole lot of optimism that that's going to be successful, though.
Right. You reminded me, I heard something a while back. I can't remember exactly who said it. So I can't give credit, to the person, but the quote was something along the lines that James Madison, he viewed, anything not, explicitly authorized by the Constitution to be unconstitutional. And after Theodore Roosevelt, anything that's not explicitly forbidden by the Constitution is constitutional. And so there was a big shift there in the early 1900s under Roosevelt in the way that the Constitution was viewed, and the powers of the president and the powers of the federal government were used. I'm sure you could trace back the lineage of it being abused way before that, and there's the Alien and Sedition Acts. There's a lot of things you can talk about Lincoln, but I think what they were trying to get at was just that the idea of the citizenry of what was constitutional or unconstitutional changed sufficiently after Theodore Roosevelt's presidency and the way that he approached the Constitution and his powers. I don't know if you agree with that, but I thought it was interesting.
Well, I mean, I can talk about Theodore Roosevelt, but honestly, I'd go back farther than that. Like you said, I would even go back before Lincoln. I'd go all the way back to Hamilton, honestly, because Hamilton just straight lied, in my opinion. Great book out there. Another book I can recommend to your readers, to you and also the listeners, is Brian McClanahan's "How Alexander Hamilton Screwed Up America," because he basically went in, and Madison was actually much more of a nationalist than people realize he was, but he didn't get, the nationalists lost at the Philadelphia Convention. They did not get what they wanted. But then they went ahead and they, people like Madison and Hamilton, they went ahead and they sold the Constitution as it was. I believe Madison was sincere. I believe that he didn't get what he wanted, but he saw the process as legitimate and decided that he would, follow what they actually had. Hamilton, on the other hand, he saw that they didn't get what they wanted and decided that he was going to push for it because he knew that later on he could subvert it. And I think that's what he did. He started out with, the implied powers, where his argument was, well, basically, we're only supposed to do these specific things that are delegated to us, but in order for us to accomplish this, we have to do these other things, and therefore, it's implied that we can do this. And over time, that morphed into what you're saying, where they're like, well, everything is now necessary, and you hear, talking about the Constitution in general, you hear a lot about the necessary and proper clause, which more progressive people and even some conservatives, they seem to read the necessary and proper clause as the "we can do whatever we want" clause.
Yeah.
So,
and it's become a period of time to which if there's a sufficient amount of public will and advocacy, it doesn't matter what the Constitution says in many ways, and that's a real big problem.
And I'm hoping in my heart, I'm hoping that it's because of ignorance. I'm hoping it's because of the fact that people aren't taught the Constitution. They're not taught original intent. They don't understand what the founders wanted to do. They don't understand what the original intention of the Constitution was. It's my hope that that's the case, because ignorance can be cured.
Yeah.
It's my fear that more people understand it than I think, and they're just choosing to abide by it being ignored. And I hope I'm wrong, but that is my fear.
Yeah, I think the power players understand. I think they know that they're subverting the Constitution and what it says and what it means. But I think they depend on a public school system that has been manipulated and dumbed down in many ways, and not been used to teach critical thinking, and instead been used to teach kids and young adults to use their brains as a storage facility rather than a tool for creativity and critical thought. That they depend on that system to create the type of people that will bend to their whims and what the way that they describe the Constitution. So I think it's kind of a combination of both. I want to get onto that into the Convention of the States. I want to. What do you think the chances are of this becoming an issue and possibly becoming one of these subjects that are going to be discussed when entering into a convention of the states? Because the last I heard, we were only probably 2 or 3 states away from agreeing to it. Do you think that a red flag law like this would be something they would pick up, or do you think they would just go full bore and repeal the Second Amendment?
Honestly, that's a hard question to answer. I have, friends I talk to who are big advocates for a convention of states because they think that they're going to control the convention. They think that they're going to get amendments, through that, that restrict the federal government, that restore freedom, that restores autonomy and sovereignty to the states. And then I also have friends who are terrified of the idea because of the fact that they feel like they might use this to push through more federal consolidation and do something crazy like repeal the Second Amendment. I honestly don't know which way it would go. Right now, I think I'm more in the camp of it's too dangerous to call a convention of states for any reason, because of the fact that, if you'd have talked to me 10 years ago, I would have had a different view, because 10 years ago I was of opinion that this is, a country in which the vast majority of the people actually, want to follow the Constitution, and, and that they agree with the founders and all that stuff. I don't think I was right. I honestly am starting to believe that this is a country where, people are starting to accept central government control, where they're starting to accept, the idea of government control of individual people for the greater good. It honestly is starting to scare me, some of the things I know. Like, I remember shortly in the aftermath of this of the shooting that we were talking about before, that triggered all the passage of all these red flag laws. The Parkland shooting. I have a cousin. Both of my cousins actually went to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. So this hit my family close to home, as far as they knew these teachers that were involved in this, and they had gone to that school. And I remember talking to a few people, a few family friends after this, and I was disgusted at the time when that teenager, what's that little kid's name? That
David Hogg.
Yes, that guy. He he just that guy and his little cadre of little followers who were going up to
Hmm.
Tallahassee
Yeah,
and
the
trying to
Hitler
get the
Youth.
gun. Yeah, yeah, and I remember making a comment along the lines of like, well, this is ridiculous. These are kids. What the heck do they know about, this? And they were like, well, they were victims. Well, gee, being a victim of a crime doesn't all of a sudden make you an expert on, how to prevent crime. But I remember, you know, when this was happening, I made this comment, and I was flabbergasted that it seemed like I was in the minority in the room because everybody's like, well, they just want to ban assault weapons and make sure that these military weapons are not in individual citizens' hands. And I was just like, I couldn't believe what I was hearing among people who are members of my family, and my family is usually very staunch conservatives, and here were these people saying, "Oh, it's okay because they just want to ban assault rifles," and I'm
Mm,
shaking my head, and I'm just like, I don't know what's going on. Now I know that's just an anecdotal story,
right.
but it definitely makes me afraid that the zeitgeist, if you will, is going more in favor of accepting these kind of laws. And I don't think that they would ever get the Second Amendment completely repealed,
Mm,
but I do think it would be a danger that they could put in there something that would give the federal government the ability to enact the types of gun control that they want.
right. Yeah, and one of the things I am concerned about is not only the gun control that the federal government is going to enact, but we're moving closer and closer to a position and a point in time here to where even if the Second Amendment remains in place, these regulations are going to increase the cost of firearms, are going to increase the cost of ammunition. You're getting to a place to where only the wealthy are going to be able to afford firearms and defend themselves. And so that's another way they can basically repeal the Second Amendment without actually going through the process of repealing the Second Amendment. Is they just make it so unaffordable to be to own a firearm, to be a gun owner, and
That's absolutely, yeah, that's a fair. Now I would say I have a few friends who would call you to task on that. They tend to be a lot more optimistic than me,
mm,
but I've brought up that fear in the past, and what their answer to that is that in reality, because of technology, we're going to get to the point where it's absolutely impossible for the government to control guns because of like 3D printing technology and other technology that's going to come out that's going to make it, you can make your own gun in a couple hours. So I don't know which one of those is going to go. Honestly, predicting the future is not really my forte. Yeah, I'm kind of stuck in the past a little bit. So
yeah, no, I just and I hear what your friends are saying. I mean, you have the ghost gunner out there. You can get programs and software for any CNC machine, and you can create parts and build your own guns and this, that, and the other. I get that. I do understand that. Like you said, the 3D printing. I technology is a double-edged sword because sometimes I look at it and say, okay, because of technology, we're going to end up living in a freer society, less dependent on government, less dependent on corporations. Most of us are going to end up being self-employed and this, that, and the other. And then at the same time, I'm like, oh, these bastards are spying on us, and they're turning this into a George Orwell novel. So I see both the good and the bad with the technology. I just don't know. You know,
Yeah,
if they were,
like I said, it's too wide open. It's too wide open with too many possibilities. And honestly, I like technology because of the fact that it's made our lives easier. At the same time, I've seen the movies. I've seen Terminator.
Hmm.
I've
Yeah,
seen I've seen Matrix. I know where this could end up. So,
right, right.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Well, I mean, we're gonna shut it down here in a minute, but I think it's important that we make sure that to restate how dangerous these red flag laws are, how many people could be losing their lives due to this, and it's real to me. I don't know if you've made this connection, but in my mind, the way I looked at it, it was the first thing that popped in my head was this resembles the war on drugs, like the beginning stages of the war on drugs. That's what it made me think of. Just going
Well,
after people.
I think it's more dangerous than that, to be honest with you. What makes me nervous about it is like because of the way that see they pass these laws because of the fact that what they do is they point to when these horrible shootings happen and you've got some nutbag who has a grudge and goes out there and kills a bunch of people. There was just another shooting New Zealand, I think, like yesterday or the day before,
Yeah.
and now so you're hearing a bunch of calls for this. And what they do is they find out that these people were nutbags, and that then they point to like some kind of warning signs, like, oh, well, we should have seen this coming. Look at all this. Look at all these things that he was saying or posting. And so then they say, well, we don't want people like that to have guns, and they'll say, well, we don't care, if regular law-abiding citizens have guns, but we don't want people like that to have guns. And most people who think with their emotions rather than their logic, they say, well, that sounds reasonable. Yeah, I mean, we don't want to have crazy psychopaths who are going to go and kill 100 people. We don't want them having guns. So yeah, that sounds okay. But what scares me about it is the fact that, like I was talking about my anecdotal part of, with my family, what happens when you have situations where, somebody who is an anti-gun person, because there's a lot of people, my wife doesn't particularly like guns. She's not an anti-gun person. She would be completely against, these red flag laws. She would be completely against any kind of confiscation because she's pro-freedom. But she doesn't like guns. Right. And there's a lot of other people out there who don't like guns and don't have that same dedication to freedom. So what do you do when, you meet a neighbor or, a cousin or something and you get into a conflict with them because, I don't know, their dog is pooping on your lawn or something. And, you say, hey, stop your dog from shitting on my lawn. And they're just like, well, screw you. And then all of a sudden they decide, well, you know what? I'm going to get back at this guy. I know he's got a bunch of guns. I hate those guns. I'm going to call the police and say that this guy's dangerous. So I think you're going to have a lot of that going on where you're going to have people using these laws to settle personal scores and personal vendettas and, coming and taking away and just taking away innocent people's guns. And as these innocent people, some of them are going to resist. And as they do, the violence is going to ramp up, and then you're going to have, full scale they're going to say, well, obviously, I'm afraid that what they're going to do is that's going to lead to the next level where they're going to say, well, look at how many people are resisting these laws. And honestly, I think they should. And that's the double-edged sword part, is because these are laws where they are infringing on people's freedom. But as people resist them, my fear is that they're going to use that resistance and they're going to say, oh, well, look, see, we can't allow guns in the hands of the populace. And then once the populace is completely disarmed, should it ever get to that level, well, I mean, now you're talking, there's nothing to stop the United States from becoming, North Korea or Soviet Union or getting, really, really bad. So I actually see this as far more dangerous than the war on drugs.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you could be right. You could be correct in that matter. It could affect. I mean, it's hard to imagine anything affecting more lives than the war on drugs has, incarcerating more people than the war on drugs. But it's not beyond the realm of possibility by any stretch of the imagination.
It's not the incarceration. I'm afraid this could lead to, full scale totalitarianism. That's what my fear would be. The war on drugs is terrible, and there's no, in my mind and to, many other people's minds, there's no excuse for locking somebody up for, possessing or using, a substance that affects only them.
Mm.
But at the same time, you can't say, well, the existence of drugs, maybe marijuana, but, existence of heroin or crack or, LSD, you can't say that this is a positive on society.
Yeah.
These are bad drugs and they hurt people and people overdose. But the citizenry being armed is absolutely a positive net benefit for society. And if they take that away, that there's so much more damage that can happen from that than, like I'm not making an argument in favor of the war on drugs. I'm just saying you can make a logical argument that there's no positive to some of these drugs.
Yeah.
But that is not the case with guns.
Yeah, no, and you are right about that. And the fact of the matter is, I mean, I think there was one of those founding guys had made a comment about giving up liberty for temporary security not being such a smart idea. But we live in a time now where we're supposed to be whitewashing history and pretend it never happened or pretend it was the worst thing ever and that there's nothing to learn from these people. So, unfortunately, people like you and I are a little can be a little obsessed with like what happened historically, and it's not relevant in today's conversation. So, but if you hang on one second, I'm gonna close this down. Oh, go ahead, bud.
Well, I was gonna say there's also the statement. You've heard the anecdote. If you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. But there's also an addition. There's an addition to that statement. I don't know if you've ever heard it. It's if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat it. But if you do study history, you're doomed to stand by helplessly and watch everybody else repeat it.
Yeah, that's probably where we're going. People like you and I are going to be standing by watching and be like, what the hell can we do about all this shit? So, but I'm gonna shut it down, man.
Yep.
I'm gonna shut it down. I appreciate you being on.
Thank you very much for having me. I mean, I really enjoyed. I've enjoyed my time as a guest. I've enjoyed the other episodes you've done. I feel very humbled that you considered me worthy to be on your show with some of the caliber of some of the other guests you've had. So I really, really appreciate it.
Well, don't sell yourself short. You're right up there with one of my favorite people to talk to. You're full of information, especially when it comes to the Constitution and history. You definitely know your shit, and I have a lot of respect for you. And you know as well as I do, we don't agree on everything, but we do share mutual respect, and understand that each person is coming from a good place and has the right intention at heart, and it just wants to get back to a point of freedom, and that's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
But hang on one second, man, and I'll I'm going to close this down and then I'll chat with you for a minute.
Sure.
All right. That was Stranger Encounters with Jason Korbel. I'm Tommy Salmons. Late.